Hi, Jim here, just dropping in before this week's episode to tell you about my latest movie, The Apocalypse Box. It's a horror film and I'd love for you to check it out. If you go to apocalypsebox.co.uk, you can find all the links on where you can watch the movie. Right, let's get on with this week's episode. Hi, Jim here, and you're listening to the Honest Filmmaker podcast. Career advice from people in the business. This week I'm speaking to Television Director Jon East. Jon's got an impressive list of credits. He's worked on Killing Eve, The Last Kingdom, Lost in Space. He's got a new series with Apple called Surface coming out, as well as having worked in the industry over 4 decades in numerous roles, starting off as an editor. I talked to Jon about some of the amazing shows he's worked on, what it's like working with showrunners and executives. We also talked about directing actors. So for a first-time director, these tips are really invaluable from someone who's been working in the industry for this long. And he also gave me some great tips for actors. So how to improve your performance and connect with your emotions and the things you really need to do when you work on a project. Enjoy. So let me start where I start with most people, which is how did you get into the industry? Big question.
Well, only because that was over 4 decades ago, so I have to sort of remember. Well, I guess I knew I wanted to be a filmmaker from at the age of 7, and so I sort of tailored my education thereafter to sort of, as best I could, sort of GCSEs and A levels and stuff to get me into a degree course that would do film and TV and what have you, and. I think I'd planned to go to the National Film School, and I'd learnt about that, but I didn't get in there for one reason or another, and so I think, what should I do? So I thought, I know, I'll become a film editor. That's what I'll do, and that'd be a good way to train to become a director, because there's a good tradition of people like Robert Wise and David Lean, and great directors who started off as film editors. So I made a concerted effort to become that, and a lot of knocking on doors in up and down Waldorf Street, as then it was full of film cutting rooms, until someone gave me a job doing some running. Just carry these tins over to Delane Lee, would you? And then suddenly you're sort of, you're on the bottom floor, aren't you, the film editing sort of ladder, and then sort of assistant film editor, dubbing editor, film editor, etc. And that way I navigated towards directing.
Right, okay, all right. And then, so I will come to, obviously, you've got loads of cool credits in there, stuff everyone's going to have heard of. Not that anyone's not going to have heard of EastEnders, but what I started at the bottom of the IMDb. So an IMDb is notorious for getting things wrong. So tell me if this isn't true. But it's got chief storyline writer. Is that? Yeah. What is that job exactly?
Well, the stories have to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so as a chief storyline writer, I had a small department. I was writing storylines, and I had 2 writers underneath me, and a sort of a third, assistant who then became a writer. And the 4 of us would effectively host yearly and 6-monthly kind of storyline meetings with the sort of established group of writers who are on the show, and the producers and the execs, etc. And we'd come armed with some ideas for potential storylines, and they'd throw in their own ideas, and there'd be a massive bun fight for 2 or 3 days over a whiteboard while I wrote them all up and divided them into months and episodes and weeks, etc., and create a kind of waveform of sort of high points and low points and what have you. And then it sounds much more mechanical than it is. It's sort of quite organic, but and then you take all that body of work back to sort of base, as it were, and then on a monthly basis, myself and my team would then generate the storyline document for the next month, which was kind of a blueprint for each episode. So you'd maybe write 7 or 8 pages of prose for each episode, describing, who said what to whom, about what, divulged what, hid whatever, met up with so-and-so, et cetera, like that. And you had a kind of A, B, C, and D sort of storylines. So you had the main story of the week, and then you had, a storyline which was maybe spreading over a year, and one of it spreading over a month, and maybe you had one small storyline that was only over 1 episode, so you sort of ratified how much of the episode should be spent on each storyline. And so it's kind of like a blueprint for an episode. It's kind of got everything in it, but apart from the dialogue, effectively.
So I'm going to jump ahead to Killing Eve. So you worked on the first series of that.
I did, yeah.
And obviously that's just became this massive, huge thing that everyone was talking about. It seemed to be like the common show of the time. What was it like working on that? And did you have any idea it was going to be as big as it ended up being?
No, it's just another show. And it's a sort of it's a job, and jobs come and jobs go, and you it sounds trite, but you just do your best on everything, and you commit to everything, fully with all of your craft and artistry and what have you, and you just don't know what's going to catch the audience's imagination. There have been other shows that I worked on that were, I thought, equally, if not better, brilliant than that, and they sort of didn't really go anywhere, and others which I worked on which are, I thought, pretty lame and caught fire and went on 5 or 6 or 7 years, so you just don't know. I mean, it's kind of wrong to say lame. It's just kind of, I would say things I didn't imagine would be so popular as they turn out, so you just don't know. No. And you always have your hopes, but in some ways, it's not a good place to have your imaginative energies beyond the end result. It's best to have them day to day, making something, rather than hoping or dreaming or wondering about what might happen in the future. That's kind of beyond your control, really. The zeitgeist, if the zeitgeist had blown a different way, that show might not have been a success. I mean, it was quite risky in a way. It's kind of quite hyper real, very peculiar characters, quite unusual, sort of kind of bending the genre a lot. Sometimes that can go down very well with the zeitgeist, and it can be consumed, and that's an exciting, sort of marriage of different styles, like Alien. Everyone now thinks, oh, Alien, what an obvious hit, but a kind of a horror film and a sci-fi film. I imagine there at the time a lot of people saying, well, which is it? It's going to confuse the audience. But of course now you're going to go, oh well, that's sci-fi horror, that's a genre. Well, it birthed that. I remember people saying at the time, Killing Eve. It's sort of kind of hyperbole, really, but the future of TV, it was pointing the direction or something like that. There are lots of headlines like that, and whether or not that's true, I don't know. But the point is, it could easily have been like, what's this oddity, and so you just don't know, really.
Yeah. And so looking at your career, and I know this is always hard to define, but do you remember the first time you were directing something big and taking on that responsibility, and what that was like, sort of walking onto that set for the first time of something that's kind of got a lot of money behind it, maybe for a big network or a big channel?
Point to something like, I suppose Downton Abbey was kind of interesting because not because I necessarily had more financial resources at my disposal, but because suddenly I'm directing, people like Shirley MacLaine, who I kind of grew up watching as a great movie star. One of my favourite movies would be The Apartment, the Billy Wilder comedy she did with Jack Lemmon, and so she sort of, that's something I saw in childhood. So in that sense, suddenly I'm directing a movie star from yesteryear who I revere and have a lot of respect for, and think a lot of their work. So that was sort of like, oh, it's Shirley MacLaine. But actually, to be honest, you have the job at hand. You have to kind of get on with it, and she needs direction as much as anyone else does, and the right sort of direction, what have you, and to understand the scene and the blocking and where the character is and all that business. So you sort of kind of get on with it. So that's not to say that you're not sort of aware in some components that you're going, oh, this is Shirley MacLaine, but you don't allow that to star strike you such that you're incapacitated. You kind of go, well, it's Shirley MacLaine, but we've still got to finish by 7 o'clock tonight, and we've got these 5.5 pages to shoot, and let's crack on because we've got these scenes to do, etc. So you sort of move on.
You have to get on with it. And what about when you're working like Last Kingdom? I guess you've got hundreds of extras. You're outdoors. Do you know what I mean? You've got all this kind of. Does that pressure ever get to you, or is it just another day in the office?
Well, it kind of is another day in the office. I mean, the thing is all about prep, really. It's the scale of something. It only threatens you if you haven't thought through, a plan and come up with a plan, and also have a backup plan and a backup to the backup plan. And, that's how really you cope with any large scale situation. If you've got hundreds of people funny enough, I was talking about this just earlier to somebody else. It is those very large battle sequences that I probably did in each season, actually, of The Last Kingdom. You do often have hundreds of people on the field in front of you, very large crew. If you have 200 or 300 stunt people all in costume, then they need a concomitant number of makeup people and costume people to service them, and ADs to get them there, and drivers, and so the whole machine grows exponentially. But ultimately, it's the same as a dinner party. 5 people around a dinner party, unless you've got a plan for that, can turn out to be a bit of a mess. So you need to have your sort of the way I go about it with very large stunt sequences or VFX sequences, as I design storyboards and shot lists and sort of camera plans and what have you. And so I have a kind of a battle plan effectively for the battle in this instance. And you sort of follow that. And if you have a grasp on the story you're trying to tell, then the scale of it is sort of immaterial, really. You sort of just focus on the storytelling and have a technical plan to achieve that.
Sure. Okay. So we talked about these big exciting sequences. What about so directing actors? So say you're a new, you're out of uni or you're working on your first feature film. What would be your advice for directing actors?
Go and do some amateur dramatics and act.
Mm-hmm.
Seriously, which
Scary.
I did absolutely, because that really gives you a taste of A, what they're experiencing, and B, what they need. And there's lots of books I could recommend, and one of the most famous, in fact, gosh, do I have it on my desk right now? I've probably got it on my desk. I'm going to reach for my.
Okay.
This is a very well-known book.
Yeah.
Directing Actors by Judith Weston, who Judith has become a bit of a friend of mine, wonderful individual. There are many other great books. Lee Michael Cohn's book is very good. In fact, I think I've got that. That's quite an interesting book.
Well, I shall put links to these in the description. Thank you.
You need to study a little bit. I mean, I think most directors, I don't want to be too generalised here, but I think most directors, probably, if they don't come from the theatrical background themselves, probably get to grips with the technical demands of filmmaking first. And that's probably because they're more predictable. A 28mm lens on a certain sensor will have a certain depth of field, a certain f-stop, every single time, and it's mechanical, right? But human beings are organic and messy and unpredictable and stuff, and so inevitably people tend to sort of sort of cleave towards the easier sort of technical predictable stuff first, and tend to leave the sort of messy difficult stuff of human emotions and relationships till a bit later. That's a bit of an overgeneralization, but I think that's kind of true. But in fact, really, as a director, your main responsibility is sort of dealing with the actors and the storytelling in that regard. That I often say to young film students, that if you suddenly get promoted into position of directing a larger scale thing, the producers will have around you, DOPs who can shoot it, editors who can cut it, etc. But only you are going to be tasked with talking to the actors. Only you are going to be tasked with getting the sort of helping them, realize kind of performance that they're capable of in a particular moment. So I'd say put your energies there first. Do some acting yourself, even just temporarily, even just to kind of get a sense of what it's like and what you need to be, what kind of direction is useful and what kind of direction is not useful. I saw a clip the other day of off a movie, a behind the scenes thing, and some director was saying, give it more energy. It's completely valueless direction. It means absolutely nothing whatsoever. It's a hopeless direction. That more intense. It's like there isn't an F9 button you can press on a human being to go, can I have more intensity? These are kind of meaningless sort of directions that most actors then have to translate into something. They have to kind of self-direct themselves in a way because they have to kind of interpret what that means. So if you can learn the actor's language and what's useful to them, that's a much better way of interacting with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is that vocabulary. It's knowing how to explain these emotions and what's going on in a way that they can understand. But it is tempting, especially if you're working on something with no money, to just say, like, give it more, give it less, because you just kind of, your brain can't compute what you're supposed to,
Yeah, and again, it comes back to prep. So if you've done your script analysis and your prep work, then you'll be armed with with the correct vocabulary, and more importantly, you'll know what the character is trying to achieve, and you'll know what tools they're using to achieve it. And you'll know what's at stake. And if you kind of know those three things, then that's really what actors need to know, more than about, sort of sadder, happier, what have you. And even emotions are sort of, whenever you read a script and it says, brackets happy or brackets sad or they burst into tears or this, or other, these are kind of meaningless as well. And most actors will just take a blue pencil and strike those out, and so will I, because they're not helpful whatsoever, because they kind of represent writers' optimism, is what I call it. It's like, i.e., the writer sitting home going, I'm not convinced that the way I've structured this story and the character's trajectory within it means that at this particular moment, the confluence of events will generate sadness or anger or whatever. So because I'm not really convinced of that, I'm just going to write in brackets, they're angry or they're sad. Now I've done my work. Whereas that's not going to make that's going to make that actor who's playing that character suddenly emote those things. I mean, they may indicate it, in a kind of dutiful way to serve the script, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be able to bring to that moment sort of a behavior which generates that kind of emotion within them. It's really about the correct behavior, identifying what the objectives are, the obstacles to that, what's at stake, how important it is to this person, and if the actor commits to the correct action, then they will automatically generate an emotional response. It may not be exactly what the script writer necessarily necessitates or wants, but there will be an emotional response, as in anything. If the doorbell goes now and you get up and go to the door and someone starts shouting at you, because they thought that you were the one who scratched their car or something and you didn't, and they come on strong, you're probably going to have a bit of an emotional response back. And part of that's going to be about making sure that person doesn't come across your threshold into your hallway, or whatever. Do you know what I mean? And you will start to because suddenly at stake for you is the penetration and violation of your home, possibly of your person. So you will have an emotional response, and you will by necessity, exhibit that emotional response as you forcefully tell that person, get back across that door. It's not me who did the thing. You've made a mistake, sir, whatever, madam, So it's more about the objective, what's at stake, and the action you take, to achieve the objective that will generate the emotion, rather than just going, I better press the sadness button now.
Yeah,
or the anger button, whatever it is.
See, I can tell you're a pro. You're already directing me, and you're already making me feel anxious about this man who's going to knock on the door.
Okay, sorry about
that. So I notice you do sessions with actors as well. So to help them, like young actors, new actors.
Yeah.
What's sort of most important thing that you try and impress on an actor when they're just starting out?
Golly. Well, I guess there's a descending priority. I mean, it may seem incredibly obvious, but in fact, knowing the lines of is number one, because you can't really act, unless you know those lines as well as your own name. Because if you're having to search in your mind for if you're looking at some unconscious, some sort of script page is pinned up inside your mind, and you're sort of scanning down, or what's the next bit, and he says this, then she says that, or then my line's coming up, and whatever you're doing, or you're going, what do I say next? Whatever you're doing, if you're apportioning any part of your psychic powers or energy to doing that inside your skull, then what you're not fully doing is looking at your screen partner, the actor that you're working with, and scrutinizing them. Because in life, if you're interacting with somebody, you give your full attention to that individual. Particularly if you want to achieve something, if you want to persuade them to do something, or persuade them not to do something, or whatever it is, you give your full attention to that individual to make sure that your message is getting through. Or if they're fighting back, you're listening to those responses and going, he or she is saying this now, are they? Okay, well, I better say my next line in this way to be more emphatic, or to retreat a little bit because I'm pushing too much, whatever it is. You have to be scrutinizing your screen partner to know how to react. Acting, as we all know, the old cliche is reacting, and that's kind of true. Well, if part of your brain is looking at a script page inside your skull, you're only partially looking at your screen partner, so you're not available to act. So it really is number one. Now, after that, kind of come what I've just mentioned in my response to your earlier question, which is about what do you want? What's the objective? That's the key thing. I mean, the old days, it used to be called motivation, didn't it? But I mean, objective is possibly a better word. In this scene, what is it that your character wants? What do they want this other person who's there to give them? etc. Whether that's an emotional gift or a verbal gift or a physical gift or an object or whatever it is, you're trying to get something out of this other person. You've got to know what that is, and you've got to know what your attitude to that is, i.e. what's your action in order to achieve that. Are you going to seduce them? Are you going to negotiate with them? Are you going to bully them? How are you going to get this thing out of them? And does those objectives change during the scene? Sometimes they do. More often than not, they don't. It's just usually one scene is about trying to get one thing. And so then you have a sense of what you want and what you're going to, how you're going to approach getting it. Now, maybe you have to modify moment by moment the tool you use, because if the other person is combative, you may want to retreat or you may want to advance yourself or what have you. But your overall objective remains the same, and the overall action you're going to take remains the same, which is I'm going to seduce this person, I'm going to bully this person, I'm going to cajole them, I'm going to coerce them, I'm going to trick them, whatever it is, whatever the transitive verb is that you're going to use to get what you want remains the same. And I suppose after that, and I suppose for those who have studied acting styles, they'll recognize that my acting style, my approach to acting is probably a practical aesthetics one, is that then you just need some kind of metaphor to sort of an as if, it's as if in my own life I'm doing X, and you don't play that in front of the camera, but you sort of have that as a private memoir, as a memoir. As, oh yeah, this scene is the as if I'm doing X, Y, and Z in my own life, And if you've got those things at your disposal, then yes, you need all the other paraphernalia of building the character and understanding the given circumstances of that individual and what have you. But effectively, if you've got objective and action and as if, you've kind of got everything you need to perform a scene with some commitment.
On your page, you've got the Reichian bodywork for actors. Am I saying that right?
Reichian.
What is that? Could you let me know what that is?
Sure. So Wilhelm Reich was a student of Sigmund Freud in the 1920s in Vienna. He was a psychoanalyst, a very preeminent psychoanalyst, quite precocious. He was very young, and most of Freud's associates were quite elderly. And he was sort of acknowledged as a sort of leading intellectual of the time. And he had a very varied, checkered sort of career. But I suppose now he's thought of as kind of the progenitor of what would be now called body psychotherapy. So this is a psychotherapy which acknowledges that the mind and the body are intimately connected, etc., in terms of one's emotional life and spiritual life, I guess. And he founded a school of therapy, which then branched into other schools of therapy. And there are many different types of body psychotherapy now, which owe their sort of origins to his work. And this is a body of work that I've studied for the best part of 40 odd years. And at a certain point, I realized that the insights that it offers could be useful to actors, because effectively this is very reductive. I mean, I'm condensing an entire man's life into a soundbite here, so I'm aware of how reductive this is. But effectively, his work was looking at blocks in our emotional systems, as it were, and psychological systems that prevented us or limited the amount of and the range and the intensity of emotions that we can express for self-preservative purposes. These are sort of defenses built up in childhood and infancy. And these blocks can sometimes be impediments to actors when they can't sort of get to the emotional state they want to get to, or they're not empathizing, fully, or they find a kind of cap, or a lot of them say, "Oh, I can't cry on camera," whatever it is, whatever it might be, all sorts of things. Some people can't get angry, some people can't feel vulnerable. It's all sorts of different blocks that this sort of armor is responsible for, and this set of exercises that I use in my workshops is drawn from all the number of different schools of body psychotherapy, which have their origin in Reich, hence they're called Reichian. And they're not quick fixes. My introduction of them to actors is more as a kind of a gateway, a doorway to invite them, if they find them useful or interesting, to then go through that doorway into a kind of a life of study and a practice. So, it's like a day's yoga is not going to transform you, but a lifetime of yoga will phenomenally transform you, in the same way that incorporating Reichian work as a kind of, part of your life will make you more emotionally available as an actor.
Right. Okay. I will look into that. And is there any difference? So you've worked on like Apple, Netflix, HBO, BBC. Uh, do those productions all feel like the same thing, or is there a sort of marked difference between an Apple production, a Netflix one, and a BBC one?
I don't think it's to do with who's spending the money. I think I mean, there are very big differences in terms of how directors work and what's expected of them and the environment that they can work within. That really comes down to the personality and proclivities and experience of the showrunner, effectively.
Mm.
Now, that individual is sort of, I mean, cut back to 25 years ago, they didn't exist, showrunners, certainly not in the UK. There was no such thing, and there was just sort of the producer and the director, and you kind of got on with it. And now there's multiple layers of stakeholders from whoever's paying the money. Say it's Netflix. You have a number of executives who work at Netflix. You'll have a number of executives who work for the production company that Netflix have commissioned. You'll have the showrunner that they've chosen to be the sort of lead artistic voice of that particular show. You'll have producers, co-producers, associate producers, co-creative producers. I mean, on Lost in Space, I on the first day of the studio, I turned around and there were 13 chairs behind me, and they're all, by the time we turned over, they're all full up with people who had the word producer in their title somewhere.
Mm.
And so clearly, the person who's the head of that pack, the showrunner, there's a hegemony of power, emanating from that individual, is going to sort of set the tone for the environment that the director's going to work in. Some are more collegiate than others, et cetera, et cetera. So that's really where the sort of difference in the environment comes from, is that the personality and the experience and the proclivities of the showrunner.
And if you've got that many people, I know they're not looking over your shoulder as in do it this way, do it that way, but if you've got that many people kind of involved at that level, are there lots or are there many situations where you have to kind of persuade things to happen? Or do you know what I mean? Is there a lot of negotiating goes on, or do they all just sit quietly and watch and go, yeah, he's doing a great job?
In my experience, they don't sit quietly. They're there because they want to have their say, and will all have their say. And sometimes it can become a bit of a bun fight while they're all contradicting each other as to what should happen next. I mean, effectively, it's a very interesting area, this. I mean, as a director, you have a number of responsibilities. You have to make sure the thing gets shot on time and on budget, etc. So if there's 4 pages or 8 pages to shoot that day, whatever it is, you have to make sure they get shot and that day, and to the right standard. So you have to keep the machine rolling along and get the best quality out of that. By the same token, often as an episodic director, and that's mostly what I do, you come in on a show, the people sitting behind you, not all of them, but a number of them, may have been nurturing this brainchild of theirs for many, many years, and it's very, they have a huge emotional investment in that, and quite rightly so. So as a director, you want to serve that, and I'm very aware of that. I have my own vision of how things should be, and you can't effectively direct unless you have a vision. But you have to sort of, and part of the interview process that you talked about earlier is about selling your vision of this thing to the people who are effectively going to employ you. So hopefully there's a synergy there between how you've imagined it and how they've imagined it. So when you arrive on set, you're not at odds. Do you mean you already have a kind of common understanding of what you're trying to achieve? Sometimes you have to sort of know who effectively is the grand fromage, who is the big who is the one you really have to listen to, because sometimes you get conflicting messages from people, and at a certain point you have to negotiate and kind of go, well, listen, I know you want that, I know you want that, I know you want that, and all these things are important, but actually they're kind of mutually exclusive, so we have to make a choice here. And ultimately being a director largely is about getting choices made. You make them yourself. A costume designer comes to you and go, red dress or blue dress, and you go, blue dress, and you have a reason for that, and so in the same way that those decisions have to be made, where does the camera go? What lens is it? Et cetera, hard light, soft light, top light, side light, back light, whatever. You have to have a view upon all of this as a director. And similarly, when you have people in the sort of echelons above you, possibly at odds with each other, then it's helpful to, as a director, kind of go, well, listen, there needs to be a decision made. This and this is exclusive. That isn't. We can do this. We can do that, but it will take longer. If you want to do that, we'll have to go back and reshoot so and so. So you have an overview, and you can offer that information. Hopefully, that will normally get a decision made, and then you can keep the machine rolling forward.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Right. Just finish up. I've got my fun questions. 2 fun questions. He says he always calls them fun questions. The first one is: have you got a motto? Have you got like a mantra or anything like that?
Well, I don't. But if I had to have one, it would be is it the 5 Ps or the 6 Ps? Do you know what they are?
I thought it was. Is it the 7? Someone said this to me the other day, and I'd never heard of them before.
Well, perfect preparation prevents piss poor performance.
Yeah.
I think it's not a bad one.
Yeah, that is a good one. I always remember Debbie McGee, Paul Daniels' wife. Her version of that was if you fail to prepare, you prepare to fail, which it's got less swearing in it, but I always remember that one.
Yeah, well, it's correct. I mean, so certainly a director's, most of my work is kind of done before I get to set, in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And I give myself a plan, and I give myself options, such that when the unknown happens, then you aren't caught out, because you've thought about, well, what if, and go, oh, well, actually I thought this might happen, or this is a possible outcome, so here's a possible response to it, and certainly I have to break down and analyze the script in as much detail as the actors do, so that when they say, when I say, well, do you know what your character's objective here is, and perhaps someone goes, well, actually I'm not too sure, and I go, well, I think it might be so and so, I've got the answer ready. I don't want to be sitting down there scratching my head analyzing the script on the day. I need to have done all that work beforehand, so preparation is key.
Yeah. And my last question is going to be, if you could reboot or remake any television show that's existed ever,
well,
what would you go for?
Quatermass.
Oh, really? All right. Why is that?
Because I just love Quatermass. I think, I love Nigel Neal's fusion of sort of the supernatural and the scientific, and or paranormal, if you want to call it that, and the scientific. I thought that was a really interesting place for 2 genres to meet. And so you know what, I'm going to come off this podcast with you, and later on I'll be eating my tea, and I'll be thinking, oh, why didn't I say X? Because that would be a much on the spot. For some reason that's what pops into my mind, because I kind of, also it would be playing to an area which I like, because I'm interested in the collision of the kind of unknown and the known, science and paranormal, when they meet in a kind of what if capacity, is a very interesting area, which navigates into a kind of Jungian perspective on life. Having said I'm interested in Wilhelm Reich and the body psychotherapy, I also have a large foot in the kind of Jungian camp, and Nigel Neal's writing, and particularly in Quatermass, navigates into that zone. So it interests me on all sorts of levels.
I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you'd like to hear from more industry professionals, how they got into the business and how you can do the same, or you just want to listen to some cool stories from movie sets around the world, then please do subscribe to the Honest Filmmaker podcast.